Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korea is reeling after a massive personal data breach at e-commerce giant Coupang, an incident that exposed information from tens of millions of users and immediately reignited national concern over digital security. And as details emerge, the spotlight has widened to past breaches at SK Telecom, KT Telecom, and Lotte Card, raising a deeper question: how does a country known as an ICT powerhouse continue to suffer failures that span both internal controls and external defenses? So what concrete fixes in law, security, and company oversight are urgently needed to stop this from happening again? For answers to this, we are joined today in the studio by Beomsoo Kim, professor at the Graduate School of Information at Yonsei University and executive director at Barun ICT Research Center. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me here.
And also joining me to my left is our go-to attorney, An Jun-sung. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start with Professor Kim. Like I've said, recently we've seen consecutive personal data leakage cases from major companies in the country. So why is South Korea so vulnerable, even as an ICT leader? And do you think this problem is only prevalent in the country?
Well, this year Korea is highly exposed, not because it lacks the security capabilities, but because hackers are more vigilant and Korea is more connected than other countries. And this phenomenon is not just unique Korean phenomena. The major countries' economies like US, Europe also experience similar phenomena at the same time. One additional feature that creates bigger incidents in Korea is that Korea is dominated by big, large conglomerate businesses in the economy, which lead to small breaches, lead to the bigger incidents.
Right, so these kinds of backgrounds actually expose Korea to these kinds of vulnerabilities. But at the same time, there are concerns, Attorney An, about the fact that these companies, large conglomerates, collect and also keep far more personal information than what's actually necessary. And this is going to make the breaches worse, of course. What's your view on that?
Okay, in terms of collection and retention of personal data by the company, I think the main issue is the consent requirement. So what I mean that the question is that what kind of the consent requirement do Korean companies have right now? And the question is that saying what happens, generally speaking, there are two types of consent requirements, legally speaking. One that's opt-in or opt-out. So opt-in means that you have option to reject before you get the service, and opt-out means that you have option to reject after you get the service. In Korea, currently, the opt-in system applied in terms of privacy protection. However, the problem in Korea right now is that by the law, what happened was that the many Korean companies, like what Professor Kim said, the big companies, major conglomerate, they abuse take advantage of the legal loophole of the opt-in system. Means that they require the users to provide excessive personal information before they get the service. So basically means that you take or leave it, because they will the dominant service player in the field. If you want to get the best service in Korea, either you sign up with us with our condition, or you go with someone else. I think that's a really big problem here. And then if we compare with the European case, Europe have a GDPR, and GDPR have, in terms of a privacy consent requirement, they use a minimization requirement, which is something a little bit stronger, actually, than opt-in system. Traditionally, EU is kind of getting toward to opt-in, and US was opt-out system. But EU and developed further, and there was a minimization, means that the company had a bear burden, have to prove that, and they have to prove the regulators that they are collecting minimum amount of information and retaining minimum amount of information. So that's the really big difference between Korea and EU. I think that's the thing, one of the things we might want to consider when we revise, the current regulation.
Right, a very important fact. So the amount of the information that the companies are holding, it could really amplify the damages. So changing to a lesser necessity of these information would be also helpful. Now, what's really striking now is that these companies actually hit by these breaches this year are actually, they receive these ISMS-P certification under the National Security and Privacy System. Professor, what are your thoughts on this calls for this certification to actually be revisited?
Well, we need to be clear that ISMS-P, the Personal Information Security Management Certification System, which is a kind of shield showing that the companies follow certain steps to protect personal information. But that doesn't guarantee that there will be no privacy breach incidents. It requires a certain level of systems to protect personal data in the businesses, and it shows that a proper level of protection in the company is being provided to protect the consumers. But nowadays, the hackers have better tools. They are using agentic AI, multimodal AI, and inside the attack, the former employer's attack, I mean, the levels of security attacks have heightened such a level so that we need to revisit some features of this certification system so that we have to follow up and provide better tools and measures to improve and provide better shield for the businesses and guidelines for the shield.
Right, definitely. That would be really necessary, following up with the level of security threats that we've mentioned. Now, what's quite unique about Coupang's case lately, that it actually involved an insider who's known to have worked there and to be a Chinese official, I believe, a Chinese national, I believe. What does that actually tell us about how companies manage their security staff and also internal controls, Attorney An?
Well, I think that it caused by a combination of many factors. So maybe I should focus on a legal perspective rather than factual issues. And I think the insider things happen very often. Actually, it's not really disclosed outside, but it's very often. So I guess this was so big instance. So it's like everybody talk about it. So now it's a big issue. But I think that all companies having similar issue, controlling inside control and compliance issue. So but however, legal question, one of the questions the public talking about is it our legal library is too weak? Or is just stronger enough to prevent the CEO or the directors or board of directors to have enough concern about what really happen if something comes out, right? And the question is that, is the Korea have a weak legal liability in terms of the breach, data breach? The answer is very yes and no. If you ask it, is it weak compared to US? Well, it's stronger. But if you compare to EU, it's weaker. So it's a relative term. So once again, Korea is kind of in the halfway, because I think we have different situation from US and EU, right? US, traditionally, they have a very ICT, global companies in headquarters, right? Like Google, Amazon, everything there, right? Actually, almost big major companies there, but Korea, we don't have really major global players, right? And the EU, in other way, EU side is more like they geared toward and protection, because the most major players are from US, US-based company. So I guess that's what happened here. So in US, we call like more they kind of focus on deregulation. And the US is more, EU side is more like a consumer protection side, right? So in Korea, we need to get a balanced approach, because the problem is it's very difficult to balance on different interests, because that if we've got too much on the one side and the other group will complaining, like if we do too much regulation, the company will complain, and too less regulation, and then the public complain. But the question is that who say which one is proper? So I think there's things that balancing, very difficult to get it, not only socially and legally, it's very difficult to do it. But my concern is that I found some new fact about the actual Korean law system, because in case of a data breach under the GDPR, Article 33, what happened was that you have two conditions combined. So one is that without undue delay, you have the controller have to report to the supervised authority in Europe, and also there's condition if feasible, there's have a 72-hour window, means that they put two conditions together. So no matter how big is your company, no matter how large is instance, you have to report to the authority within 72-hour windows. But Korea, however, my personal my educated guess is that when the Korean National Assembly drafted the bill on the Korean Personal Information Protection Act, they think about the Euro model, and they were thinking about two conditions, right? 72-hour window and without delay, and they separated. So they put undue delay, without delay, not undue delay, that's European, but they put due delay, without delay in the act, and they put the other part, 72-hour, on the enforcement decree of the act. So what happened was that the Korean law doesn't have much strong, it's not strong enough to protect like the EU style. And plus on the second section, on the enforcement decree, what happened was that they put the 72-hour there in terms of major cases. If for instance, include more than 10 million users, something, there's a specific limit. So it will apply with only big instance. So I think that after this instance, maybe you have to rethink about our regulatory framework. Do you really care about the details implementation? So I think it's time to focus on how to improve the details, how you provide more effective enforcement of the law.
Thank you for explaining for that, Attorney. Now, when we turn to SK Telecom and KT, it was actually a kind of a different reason. We learned that it's about external hacking. What kind of basic protections do you think our companies are still missing, Professor?
Well, the security professionals, there are many security professionals in the businesses, but we need more. We need more budget to enforce the security policies the companies need to follow. Back to basics, I say. I mean, more people, more budget, proper training, and vigilant approach to follow steps to protect company assets. Korean law requires for security breaches notice to the government officers within 24 hours window. For personal information breach requires 72-hour notice. And the Korean law is one of the first law that requires informing individuals for public and private sector after data breaches. And following these also require nowadays we are also talking about the stronger fines or punishment. But not only these stronger fines and punishment, we need to develop standards, better standards, for instance, containment, recovery, and transparent explanation on how these instances happen, what customers, individuals should do to contain the additional breaches or accidents after breach.
Right, definitely. So looking into the actual roots and also follow-up measures and raising the standards would be very important in these kinds of cases. Now, based on the scale of the incident, like our Professor Kim has touched upon, Coupang is now facing a possibility of the largest fine ever, up to 3% of its revenue, roughly 1.2 trillion won, that is. So in global terms, how meaningful is this figure, Attorney?
It's an interesting question because if you compare with the EU, the GDPR, there are two levels of the standard level. So the first higher level is 4%. It's like 20 million euro, and or about up to 4% of the total worldwide annual turnover of the previous year. So you have that case that we compare with higher level is 4%, lower than higher. But there's the other class, the level in EU GDPR, and you have 2%. It means that have a 10 million euro or 2% of that total worldwide annual turnover of the previous year of the company. So what we can just compare on the number. It's like 20 million 4%, 10 million 2%. And Korea is 3%, it's in the middle. But it's very interesting because that I do not think that stronger fine will make change. It's not, because it's not caused by a single factor, it's very combination, a lot of things happens. But however, when you enforce something policy, you have to make it something very effective. But the way I see it here, if it's the Coupang case, right? It's different from SK Telecom. SK Telecom they're providing domestic service only, right? But in Coupang, they're providing service in Taiwan, right? They were a global player already. And so what happened was that if you compare with the EU standard, right? They're using global turnover. the global revenue, but Korean law is just say turnover revenue. So because not many companies actually provide global services right now, right? So my concern is that actually when I'm sure they will litigate it about whatever fine they got it, they will sue the government and there will be litigation. And happened was that think about what happened that what is the actual the annual revenue of Coupang? Is it Coupang Korea only, or Coupang Taiwan, or Coupang US, which is incorporated in the New York Stock Exchange, right? That's the legal issue because you have to follow the money and how the transaction happens. However, one thing really surprised me on the Korean law, right after this following paragraph has exception to how to calculate the revenue. They will specifically exclude unrelated revenue. That means that anything leaking and anything incident happened, right? That is unrelated to the violation. So if the Coupang say this certain revenue, part of revenue is not related to our certain service, they can exclude. The government have to exclude. I mean, it's not them. It's the government have to exclude because there's a specific provision. So I think that's really concerning because and the government would think, the company with they're looking at the law is like, wow, well, we have a going out, there's a loophole here. So we can complain that we have to limit our damage up to the Korean operation. Also, we can have, within the Korea, we can say this is only the certification sector. It's non-certificate sector, it's not effective. So they can really minimize. So personally, I'm very concerned that actual damage amount will be much less than what the people expected.
That's very concerning. So even though that could not really just prevent these kinds of cases, it could really help, raising these penalty levels. So in fact, public sentiment is also shifting towards raising these tougher penalties, and President Lee has in fact also ordered the government to move towards implementing this punitive damages system. Attorney, for our viewers, could you tell us what exactly is this punitive damages, and how do you see it being implemented in real life?
Yeah, well, so from legal perspective, there are two damages, right? There's a legal, civil damage or the criminal damage, more like a penalty, right? Civil damage means the money. You pay. You made something screw up. You pay money. Like Coupang, there was a data breach and a lot of the damage here. They have to pay for the individual, the victim, whoever victim. But here is a punitive damage. Is kind of a hybrid. Like say, it's a civil case, but the court in some cases allow that higher. It's not really proportional. It's not really reasonable on the legal sense. But they give them, in some certain case, very limited case, they allow to go for lump sum amount. And they can mix their cases. It's a U.S. system. They mix all the class, right? And so when a court approves the class action, means that it's very interesting because they all get together and they can sue them. So it's not individual remedy they get it. So Korea, you can sue Coupang. There's maybe 10,000 people get together and they sue them. But the final remedy is individual. Each person maybe get, I don't know, 50,000 won, something very small, but it's not individual. So when it happened was that it's kind of a settlement issue. But in the class action means that everybody get together. Maybe to me it's only 50 or 100,000 won, but we put together could be 1 trillion won. So it's a really big impact. Also, there's one we already have a kind of way to punitive damage in law in system. You can have up to 5 times. Once again, there's a problem. From legal perspective, if someone gave me this regulation, what do you think? They say there's no way. Because if you want to prove them, the Coupang made a mistake, or in terms of data protection, you have to prove court that there is the willful misconduct and gross negligence. When you say legally, gross negligence is almost criminal level. So it means that you have to 80 or 90% higher to prove their damage, their degree of the misconduct, which is almost impossible. So interesting enough, and it's not surprised to notice the fact that there is no single case in Korea, court case, they allow the punitive damage section provision in Korea, although they have been implemented for a long time, because the court cannot apply because it's too high standard. It's gross negligence or willful misconduct. Willful misconduct or the intentional misconduct means that someone intend to hit someone. It's almost criminal. Means that it's almost criminal, but not as much as high criminal. It's a very high standard, so no way you can get it. So I guess that's needed to get changed, corrected, because that's too high. If you want to put that kind of damage, something effective damage remedy, right?
Right, so the question will be whether this punitive damages can actually be implemented in real life. Now, financial regulators, in fact, warn of that the latest cases of leakage could lead to voice phishing and smishing risks from the data that they've received. Professor, what should consumers, us, be most alerted to right now?
Well, as financial regulators said, we need to be aware of the scammers can use voice phishing, smishing, and financial scams to take advantage of victims of these incidents. Well, not only the data being exposed to the scammers, but to the dark side of the internet, the ordinary scammers often call the victim and say, oh, in order to get the additional benefit from these incidents or to provide additional protection, you need to sign up on this, you need to register and through this, you need to provide your credit card number and so on. These are the new types of incidents nowadays happening. Not only we worry about the data that has been exposed, but also we need to aware of there are scammers who don't have our data, but just use the fact that there is an incident. So the scammers love this type of tactics and this type of timing. So we need to be aware of that. And we need to be vigilant on what the financial regulator says and what the company says. On top of that, some people worry too much about what's going to happen and so on. So they are fearsome and they stop doing certain things they need to do online. But if consumers are aware of what's happening and the damage that can be, the incidents that can damage individuals can maybe limited, and they should be, and if they pay more attention on what's happening and on the online, then they can be they can build a little bit more trust, and they can actively participate in the digital world as it has happened.
So we really should be more alert and also keep extra precaution on the calls and messages that we're receiving.
But too much worry may also hurt.
Right, balancing it would be very important. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Kim, tonight.
Thank you.
And of course, Attorney An, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
That'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.